name's Aileen Robinson. I'm an assistant professor in the TAPS department. And I am here to talk to you a little bit about something I recently discovered in California that connects with my research and also connects with kind of wider kind of performance culture in this area. And I got really interested in this from a fellow Victorianist who studies performance and fashion and teaches at UCLA. And I was really interested in, I'm interested in the performances of magic and science and race in the 18th and 19th centuries. And one of my studies into magic, which involves looking at cabinets of magic, sleight of hand, and other kinds of performances throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, was the kind of performance and the interaction between magicians and spiritualists. And as it turns out, we have our very own magic house here in the Bay Area. This house is called the Winchester Mystery House. It was owned by Sarah Winchester. Winchester is the heir to the Winchester rifle fortune. She moved out west and started to build on an old farmhouse that she bought in Santa Clara County. Now, this house for the last century has been a site of many different kinds of speculations about its weird and eccentric character, and also about Sarah Winchester herself and her relationship to the spirits. And so I wanted to give us just a little bit of a tour through this history and a kind of an entree into the relationship between spiritualism and magic. And if you're interested in anything pertaining to this area, come talk to me. I'd love to talk more about it. So the Winchester Mystery House was one of these incredible kind of feats of construction built over several decades from about the 1880s until the 20th century. And when Sarah Pardee Winchester moved out, it was an 8-room farmhouse, and she enlarged it up to 160 rooms. Now, some of those rooms were destroyed in the 1906 earthquake. And the wreckage of those rooms can actually still be seen in tours of the house today. The house, as it was finished in 1922, became the inspiration for Disneyland's Haunted Mansion. And it also promulgated many different kinds of stories about why this house had so many different quirky elements. For example, there are staircases that lead to nowhere. There are doors just next door to each other, one large, one small. There are several different sets of staircases winding in different kinds of ways up and through the house. And interestingly enough, the house was built when in its expansion, it wasn't built to, wasn't kind of constructed to have the walls being removed and then added on. It was added to the exterior of the current house. So the house is really one house nested inside many other houses. Sarah Winchester lived there alone, and then was joined by her niece later, Daisy, and had several maids and servants to upkeep the house throughout its duration. And the myth of the house today is that she decided to build continue construction on the house because of a fear that she would die without the constant noise of the builders surrounding her. And so the idea and the myth that grew around the house was that construction workers were building constantly, that no sound of hammer could not be heard, because the sound of the hammers was to ward off the spirits that were haunting her. And these spirits were the spirits of the deceased who had died due to the Winchester rifle. Because of the extent and of the Winchester rifle in the kind of Western movement of immigrant settlers to the United States, she believed that the deceased who had experienced trauma at the hands of this rifle company were haunting her. And so to appease them, she built this mansion. Now that story is one that has been told over and over again throughout the 20th century as the house was sold to a renter who turned it into a museum and an attraction for those visiting in California and those residential. The house, and one of the kind of major elements of this house is the secret room that lies in the kind of middle of the house. And the secret room can be accessed through kind of a hidden door from a hallway, and then there's a kind of a false door that then opens and reveals kind of the exit out. And it is argued that this room, this hidden room, completely surrounded by the house, was actually the seance room, the room where Sarah Winchester called upon the spirits and kind of engaged with them. And that kind of vision of her as a spiritualist is one that continues to draw spectators in to the house. And there are many reports of ghosts being seen throughout the houses, ghosts of those who worked on the mansion and others. And so I just want to give a little bit of a background to spiritualism. Now, spiritualism was a kind of an offshoot of many different kinds of approaches to kind of ghosts and spirits that started in 1848, specifically around 1848, when a group of sisters, Kate and Margareta, and then their older sister Leah, announced that spirits of the dead were trying to communicate with them in their family home by these ideas of raps or knockings on wooden surfaces. And a new religious movement emerged out of this. And it spread to Great Britain as well. And many flocked to see the sisters communicate with the spirits. And this idea of table rapping emerged. The idea that through these kind of wooden objects, spirits were making themselves known. This extended to also seeing spirits captured in photographs, ectoplasm coming from the medium's body, and other kinds of engagements with the spirits, such as automatic table writing, and kind of other kinds of communication. And we can see the legacy of spiritualism in movies and kind of entertainment throughout the 20th century. And these kind of ideas of being able to connect with the spirit was something that was appealing to people who were also invested in what was coming to be modern science. And so this idea of science and religion were kind of being connected in spiritualism, and that many, many, many scientists were deeply involved in spiritualist orders. People would get together for group seances to contact the spirits, most often with women mediums, because it was considered that women would be more sensitive to hearing the spirits. Now, what magicians at the time they played an important role in the role of spiritualism at this time, because many of them sought to debunk the legacy of the spiritualists, the practices of the spiritualists. And so many famous magicians actually made their fame on being debunkers of spiritualists and creating their own spirit cabinets, their own table rapping and seance sessions. Most famously, John Henry Maskelyne and David Devant and George Cook were a group of magicians that ended up forming the first permanent house of magic in London called the Egyptian Hall. And they attempted to debunk through their performances the Davenport Brothers, another kind of spiritualist touring community group that presented their work to interested spectators. Several volumes came out of debunking spiritualism and celebrating spiritualism, and kind of a battle kind of went on through the 60s and the 1860s and 1880s, all about, can we see spirits, can we see ghosts, and are they real? Now, of course, magicians ended up not only debunking, but then including these spiritualist practices in their own magic tricks, becoming well known for having kind of a spiritualist kind of set or narrative within their own kind of performances outside of the standard debunking show. And so the legacy of spirits being among us was kind of further kind of consecrated in certain ways through the magician's own actions. And now we see contemporary magicians pull on these legacies constantly. Now, arguments raged over the 20th century within hobbyists who were hobbyists and academics who were very interested in Sarah Winchester's legacy over whether she was actually a spiritualist or just a woman outside of her time, meaning a woman that actually didn't participate in the kind of standard rhythms of society in terms of business, in terms of her daily life. She was an entrepreneur. She was an incredible inventor of kind of implementer of new inventions and technologies. She didn't live by any kind of standard code, and it is argued that perhaps it was her what was perceived as eccentricities that actually made kind of her neighbors in San Jose consider her to be kind of a spiritualist. However, we can also argue that in fact, she was very much a part of a group of individuals who moved out to California, who were in search of a particular kind of freedom of life out here in California, and who celebrated spiritualism as a mode of connecting beyond their kind of own borders. And we can also look to the kind of mysterious stories that surround Stanford's very own Leland and Jane Stanford, both known to have some dealings with spiritualism as well. So in the Winchester Mystery House, which you can visit now, and currently they have a video tour that you can watch, you get a sense of the kind of warren and architectural wonder that is the house. Wandering through the hallways, going into the rooms, you see the kind of mastery of kind of architectural styles that range from the late Victorian to the early 20th century. You see stained glass windows with unique patterning and designs in almost every room. You see hallways that extend and hide their kind of wonders behind their doors. You also see her bedroom, kind of furnished in the way it would have been furnished at the time, with period pieces. A lot of the pieces in the house were sold off to fund the house itself, and to fund this kind of its life as a museum. And we see period pieces, some of which were donated back from her original collection when this museum opened. Throughout the house, you see these kind of emblems of technological adoption that were kind of significant for the time. She has an elevator. She has multiple plumbing throughout the house. She has multiple different kinds of skylights and different kinds of unique methods for allowing natural sunlight to flood into her space. The modern plumbing for her servants was kind of unheard of in many ways during this period, and also very, very unique and eccentric kind of modes of kind of entering and exiting the house itself. So for example, she has staircases built to her own height specifications, and she was quite a petite woman. And so she has regular sized doors and then doors for her own height. And then she has stairs that are much smaller, that you can ascend alongside stairs that are normally spaced. This was because of her arthritis in her legs. On the top, and then multiple levels of the house, there are many areas where you can walk out and stare over the vast expanse of the mansion, watching its kind of curves flow down into the street and environs of San Jose. One remarkable element of the house and of the museum that they show us is the fact that much of it was destroyed, as I mentioned earlier, in the 1906 earthquake, and much of it also wasn't finished. So in 1922, there were still rooms being built, and you can see the kind of extra materials that were present, that were going to go into these different rooms. And so not only are you caught between the finished and damaged elements of the earthquake, but then also the kind of unfinished life of the house as well. There are doors and and alleyways that go kind of nowhere. There's one door called the Door to Nowhere that leads just out and drops off into the garden. So while the Winchester Mystery House is a space where it holds many secrets, and while it's unclear, depending on who you listen to, whether or not spirits and spiritualism was something that Sarah Winchester practiced, it is definitely something that is in the life of the house today. And this is what draws many individuals to kind of be in the rooms and to explore the space and its kind of multiple, in its proliferation. And I, as a performance historian, am always interested in the ways in which performance manifests itself in different kinds of locales, in the ways in which we can look at a modern woman from the 19th century exploring how to kind of expand her horizons, and also perhaps horizons beyond her expectation in California. If you're interested in knowing more, there's lots of different kind of books and movies that have come out about Sarah Winchester. Most recently, the film Winchester with Helen Mirren, and a more academic book called Captive of the Labyrinth by Mary Jo Ignoff. And I would say that one of the questions that I want to leave you with is, can a legend conjure the spirits?